our website, salamradio.co.uk.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Salam Radio. This is Why Politics Matters, and we have got a very, very exciting, action-packed, controversial show for you today. I'm here with my usual co-host, Alex Blower.
Salam alaikum, good evening.
Wa alaikum salam, good evening to you. And we've also got a special guest in from Peterborough Tenants Union. I just want to check, are you talking on their behalf today or just randomly in today to have a little chat?
I'm randomly in, but I'm sure I've got the blessing to say... speak for them a little bit.
Excellent. Ian Wright's with us. Ian Wright, fantastic insights into housing, investment in housing, landlords and so on. We've had many chats with Ian over the years, and he's certainly opened my eyes to a number of things. Before we kick off with the show, I do want to say, do you want me to move to the left? Do you want Alex to move to move to your right, his left? Is that a little bit better? Yeah, we want to see your pretty face on the camera.
Get the technical issues sorted out.
Before we do kick off with the show, I want to say, firstly, thank you so much to everyone who's interacted with a number of Facebook posts I've put out over the last few days. Alex, you've been following them. I know you've been commenting on a number of people's comments.
Yeah,
and what have you enjoyed the most about just your insights into what their mental gymnastics might have been while they're putting some of the comments on there?
Oh, I think you've just pinned it down there. It's actually, you can almost smell the landlords in the comments, can't you? And you might have noticed that I did successfully sniff a couple out. I had a 50% hit rate. I only questioned 2 people, thinking that maybe both of them were coming from a position of support due to their class priorities, and was 50% right.
It's not bad going.
You can notice them, and you notice them from the mental gymnastics that they go through. They believe that they're offering a service. They believe that they're doing nothing wrong.
Yeah,
and why wouldn't they? I mean, that is certainly the narrative that is put forward when we have a look at our council sitting in the cabinet. You have to struggle to see how many of them are not landlords, and then we have Labour, who are meant to be a party sitting on the left, who's led by a serial landlord.
There's loads of points you made there, and we're going to unpick those over the course of the show. But really, I mean, I guess high level, the topics we're going to talk about are discussions around housing, whether or not it's a human right to have housing, or if it's a commodity, if it's an asset. Can we treat it like an asset? Is it fair? We're going to be talking about things like, are all landlords bad? Is one rental property the same as having 20 rental properties? Rent increases, rent controls, those kinds of things. And Ian, I know there's lots and lots of talk around rent controls in Peterborough Tenants Union. That's probably almost trying to apply a plaster to a much bigger problem. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, at the minute, at Peterborough's Tenants Union, we're just trying to sort of put a little bit of power balance back, because it's so skewed at the minute towards the landlords. And hopefully we can talk about Section 21, because that's our main gripe at the minute. Section 21 evictions. Yeah,
evictions. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, so evictions is the one that really pulls at the heartstrings, and even landlords will look at some evictions and think, oh, that's pretty harsh. Like, they might understand it. They might be, they should have paid rent, whatever. But that's the point where it actually impacts lives tangibly, physically, and drastically, and not just making it a little bit more difficult to make ends meet month by month.
Absolutely. But before we get on, I think it's important to just get 1 or 2 points of terminology, as we usually do a lot of the time in these shows, pinned down. And one of them is that when we're talking about housing, and we're talking about a right to housing, what we're actually talking about is a right to shelter.
Yes.
Okay. That housing just happens to be the kind of shelter that is prevalent in our society, and all humans need shelter to be able to survive, particularly in this hemisphere, in Northern Europe, with the weather and the elements that we have. So let's just pin it down that we're not just talking about something. The system we have has removed shelter into a format where it has to be paid for. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, humans all over the world live in shelters without housing, but it's important to seek these, whether it be for a cave, whether it be for cutting down trees. The purpose is that in our society, the creation of land and land ownership stops us from going and seeking shelter anywhere else but in a house.
I want to name drop some people that have made comments as we go cover these things, and this is what Mohammed Manshur said. Mohammed Manshur said the supply side is being restricted. He's comparing it to Pakistan, where if you've got some land, you can pull some people together, you get some mud, put up a mud hut, put on a roof and you've
Yep.
got shelter. And in this country, you can't do that. You can't go into a forest, chop down some trees, make yourself a shed. Somebody's going to, the council will come and they'll arrest you, they'll evict you, they'll say you're trespassing or whatever. So you're absolutely right that you can't just go off and do that. And it is a basic human need. So maybe we need to think about whether or not there needs to be like universal basic housing, as an example. And that's probably way off in the extreme as far as a lot of people are concerned. But Ian, just want to bring you in here. Rizwan Mahmood says housing is a basic human need.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, that's one of the founding principles at Peterborough Tenants Union is that housing is a human right.
Yeah.
And it should not be there as a financial asset. It should not be there to be profited from. It is, like I say, a basic human right for survival, same as water, energy in this society, food. It's one of the basic things that humans need to survive.
Yeah, so we did a show, I can't remember what it was on, but we were talking about universal basic income, and that income amount should cover the cost of clothing because you need to be clothed in public, the cost of food because you need to be fed, the cost of things like gas, electricity and so on, and the cost of your housing because these are basic needs. And
Arguably everything which we need to survive on a daily basis, which has been monetized and you cannot get from the planet without the barriers which have purposefully been put in place.
yeah, but if we did that, there's so many industries where people would no longer be making profits.
There's so many parasitic industries.
And I know it's slightly off subject, but
Go on.
From moving on from that, that's why I would always, from the position we're in now, be an advocate for universal basic services over universal basic income.
Good call.
So universal basic services is where all the necessities are paid for by the state or the local.
Excellent. Yeah.
So social housing,
social
social food
transport,
banks for a
food banks.
basic necessity.
Exactly.
And that's not to say that all food comes from these places,
Exactly
is it?
that.
Or that all the services
But it's
come.
a safety net at
Yes.
that point, and housing should 100% be included in that.
Excellent.
Agreed.
I mean, look, Faisal says universal basic housing is a good idea. Faisal, just pushing that back, what about universal basic services? Do you think that's equally a good idea? That's probably more of an umbrella item that covers the same kinds of things. Otherwise, you'd be having 8-10 different conversations. Universal basic services is a catch-all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just brings everything in. So thoughts on that, Faisal, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, so let's switch it up again. Assuming you are in that position where you are forced into renting, and lots of people are for whatever reasons. I mean, there's obviously some people that choose to rent, and we can talk about them. There's probably a very small minority who choose to rent. I'm thinking things like students.
Very small, and only
Yeah.
for, I would say, for short-term reasons due to the situation that they find themselves in. But due to the precarious nature of rental in the UK, that's why people don't. It's through the lack of security, and that's not something that happens throughout the world. There's a lot of places where home ownership isn't as high as what it is in the UK, but people live in houses with a very, very solid sense of security within them.
I do think when we talk about people that want to rent, I do think it's a distortion in the conversation because it is such a minority of people
Yep.
that would turn around to you and say, actually, I'm quite happy paying extortionate rents to a private landlord rather than being in social housing or
Would you say
owning
that's
property.
the fly in the ointment, similar to when you get bots on Facebook saying, I'm a nurse and I'm on 40 grand a year and I don't know what all these nurses are complaining about. It's almost like
Yeah,
distracting you from the conversation. I'm a train driver, I'm on 50 grand a year. Got fed up with it, and then I thought
I
I'd
think
quit.
it's just a point landlords like to make, if I'm completely honest, with the mental gymnastics again.
And just because somebody chooses to rent doesn't mean they don't deserve some kind of representation.
No.
You can still fight their corner and say, yeah,
Yeah,
you
of
choose
course.
to rent, that's fine, but we're still going to fight your corner and make sure you have above standard housing and rent controls and some kind of link to inflation in terms of increases in rent.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is, like I say, most people are renting out of necessity, but if you're renting, you are being exploited, especially in the market how it is here today. I mean, you haven't got to look very far to where it's different. Germany have very, very different renters' sort of rights and rent controls,
Okay.
and even price fixing in certain cities.
And it goes regional as well, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Based on the cost of living in these areas.
That's exactly right. And what you find is most people actually do rent in Germany. Home ownership's a lot lower, but that is because of the stable nature. I mean, we talk a lot in this country about the aspiration to own a house, but really what we're talking about is the aspiration for security.
Yes.
To have a house that you can treat as your own, decorate it as you want, have pets if you want, have someone to come around if you want.
Drill a screw in and hang up a flipping
Yeah,
portrait.
exactly,
it's like,
exactly.
yeah,
And-
you can do that without permission. Yeah.
And know for the next 5, 10, 15 years that will be your home.
Excellent. So we've had a comment in from Sadiqa Ismail saying universal basic services allows all the people who need housing to have the option to be housed within their right. It also allows people who want to supply rental properties. It's fairer ground for all people. So that's kind of saying it doesn't necessarily change the dynamic for landlords. They can still choose to rent out their properties, but if there's universal basic services, then people will still be able to access housing there.
Well, we haven't got to go back very far in this country to where most people lived in social housing, in council houses.
Yes.
So, we're talking in the abstract about universal basic services, but we've had a model of housing in this country that worked very well for a lot of years. And yes, there still was home ownership, and that wasn't available to lots of people, but there was a lot more people in stable homes, and that's the point that needs to be made. I mean,
As a percentage.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
And I think the numbers on this are quite eye-watering.
Go on, give me some numbers.
Right to buy, 1.9 million council houses were sold. Right?
Okay.
In that same from then when Margaret Thatcher introduced it to now, we've only had 345,000 come back on.
No way.
Yeah.
Zero of them in this current Conservative government's term in the Peterborough
So wait,
area.
hang on, wait. Slow down.
So
Slow down.
we're
So
1.5 million houses down.
this is what I'm saying. Like, I don't think, and this might be bread and butter to you. This might be things that you talk about regularly, but as somebody who's not as deep dived into this, and I'm sure you're probably the same as me, but 1.9 million houses that were there for the social good of communities,
to help society,
to help society, to help people who are less well off,
or needed support,
were then sold to those same people who were in need. So fine, we don't begrudge them, but instead of replacing the 1.9 million and then building more for population growth, we've actually only built 350,000.
So
nationwide.
On that,
wow,
I've got another eye-watering statistic, and this one's on London. So
you're literally blowing my mind. Like, this is
little
crazy.
bit irrelevant, but London, 80% of ex-council properties are now on the private rented market. So we can look at this as this right to buy was a way for people to aspire to home ownership. But what's actually happened is
80% of former council houses are now
London,
being rented
privately. Yeah. So this is when people say, "Oh, right
Madness.
to buy got people on the property ladder." It did, but what it really did was it privatised the social housing sector.
Yes.
They couldn't sell it off like they did British Airways, because one, there'd been uproar, and two, it'd have to be quite a sizable corporation to buy 1.9 million homes. But what they'd done was they made small capitalists out of all these homeowners, even if it's 2 generations down. And it this is conversation for another day, but it changed the class interests of the demographics that were voting Labour and Conservative at the time.
Yeah, so I've definitely come across that. Obviously, out canvassing for votes, you tend to find traditionally Labour areas or traditionally left-leaning areas, traditionally working class areas. But because they've had the right to buy, and they all of a sudden they own their own home, and they've got a nice, pretty front garden, and a little picket fence, and a back garden, and it's like it's our own place, and they feel like they're part of the affluent group. They feel like they're part of the haves rather than the have-nots, and they feel like they can't vote for Labour because that's just not who they are anymore. They've kind of elevated their social status because they've had a right to buy 2 generations ago. It's sad to see. You're smiling. What do you think?
Well, I think it's very interesting because what you've kind of described is how we seek out where our interests align.
Yeah.
And that was a really clever thing about what Thatcher done when she introduced the right to buy, is she shifted people's interests away from where they really aligned into this capitalist class. And let's be honest, all these people that do live in these houses, most of them still do have mortgages.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're still only a couple of paychecks away from hitting real financial issue as we hit these disasters which were now happening.
But they've got a pretty garden fence.
Yeah,
It's
sure,
really
they have.
nice.
They
It's
might have a
painted white.
Mercedes.
Yeah.
They might have a Mercedes sat on the
Absolutely.
their block
Yeah, yeah.
And more to the point, they might take some of the capital out of that house to buy another as a bit of an insurance policy.
So I'm definitely going to come on to that. That's something that we definitely need to talk about, the whole remortgage, and then what is it like? Leverage your position and then maximize your passive income. I hate those, but they're so popular right now. A couple more comments I want to read out. Sadiq has come back and said, "I'm from London, and that study is absolutely correct. Right to buy has been manipulated to the max." Alex Hall is listening, and thanks for listening, Alex. Alex says, "Good point about the historical model of housing in the 1970s and 80s. You would have a secure tenancy, which would essentially mean you couldn't be evicted unless you stopped paying your rent." So I have to say that's before my time. I'm glad to say that, but it's before my time. But that's a million miles away from where we are now. And you're talking about no fault evictions,
Yeah.
Section 21. Do you want to just talk to us a little bit about that? Because and just before you do, I want to just reference Nadia Abdurrahman, whose comment you might have read, Alex, talking about an eviction. She's talking about an eviction of a single mum of school-going children
In the local area.
in the local area, a Muslim family renting from a Muslim man. And in the capitalist world, it doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or not Muslim, but you think that there's an element of empathy there. But no, it was, you can't keep up your rent payments, I'm going to evict you because the market rate for my house is £900 a month and you can't pay that. And it's absolutely disgusting. So tell us a little bit about no fault evictions, where we are with that.
So Section 21, no fault evictions, and this was actually just while I'm dissing Maggie. This was another thing that happened in 1988. She removed all the rent controls, which liberalised the market and got us into this position.
Okay.
But anyway, it just means the landlord can decide through no fault of the tenants. It could be
Sure.
good tenants, as we often hear, paying their rent every month, but we're going to serve you a Section 21 and you've got to get out.
And what kind of time frame notice is given on that?
It is one that I should know. I think it's 2 months is where we're at with that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not long enough to find
Absolutely
alternative
not.
accommodation at the current market how it is. And
No, but
now,
I'm just
like
thinking,
you say,
as a parent,
yeah.
you're a parent as well. You're a
Yeah.
parent as well. As a parent, your kids go to school, right? Your kids go to school. They've got friends in the neighbourhood. They go out to the park and they play, and just living day to day, thinking in 2 months' time there's a chance I'm no longer here. And the thing is, if you've got a good good landlord who's charging you below market rent, you're probably at greater risk because you're thinking the market rate of rent is £800 a month. He's only charging me 700 because he's nice, but I'm more likely to be evicted because he'll probably just have a change of heart. He'll have a change in circumstances, and all of a sudden he'll want to extract more income from his house.
And this is what we're finding more and more and more now is, you'll have a tenancy agreement for a 12-month period. The landlord's talking to his landlord friends and realise he's undercharging the tenants, and he's fixed into that till the end of that agreement. Could be 12 months, 24 months. And they look and think, and when they increase the rent, it's got to be at a reasonable rate after that year, which is a bit, that is a bit woolly, I'll accept.
Sure.
But say 5% or something like that would be what would normally be deemed as reasonable.
Okay.
So rather than doing that, they serve a Section 21, put it on the property market for rental, and they've got people queuing up to pay that money because there's a supply shortage.
Are almost trying to outbid each other, as we've seen in some of the threads on online places, haven't we?
In London this last year, 2022, a particular problem, even viewing places, having to pay to go view rental properties, and then having to do bidding or telling the landlord almost like a Britain's Got Talent style why you should rent it to me. It's not.
I've got 2 years of issue-free rental schedule,
and I'm willing
payment
to pay
signed.
£100 over what you're asking for.
Yeah, and I can give you a 2-month deposit, and I've got references, and I've got a full-time job, and I've got no pets, and I don't smoke, and
so the supply shortage is so big now. And like I say, the worst area for that is London, but it spreads. It starts in London, these problems, and it does make its way further north up the country.
Alex, I was just going to go on after you.
I was just going to say as well that but this shortage that we talk about, this scarcity, it is an illusion of scarcity as well, though, Ian, isn't it? It's like we have enough empty homes in the UK to not only meet our current need, but to house other homeless and still have approximately 150,000 empty dwellings left over.
Yeah, and this is why when we, talk about, build more houses, it's not the sort of golden bullet that it's made out to be, because we do have the property there. And hence why this problem's worse in London, is because the property value is so high that you now have people buying as investments and them sat there empty.
There you go.
Alex, I was going to ask you another question from Sadiqa again, saying, based on this discussion, should right to buy still exist? Can it be justified? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, first of all, ultimately the answer is no. However, in the current landscape, it's hard to remove it when actually it is the only way where a lot of people on those bottom rings have any chance of competing in the capitalist world. I mean, we're in a position now where if you're not owning assets and you're not getting on the assets and your children aren't starting to own assets, you might never will.
Can I share a bit of an anecdote? So just from my time growing up, so we were fortunate in that we never had to live in social housing. My dad just about did enough to be able to afford his own house, and he did buy a house.
And there should never ever be any shame in doing so.
There's absolutely no shame in that. Yeah,
and the stigma is also what has been created.
But there was a large portion of the community, the Pakistani community, who were living in social housing, and when the right to buy came along, we felt like it was a godsend. Like, well, there's no way we can afford to buy a house, right? And we've been paying rent for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years in this house. If we get the right to buy, all we're doing is we're owning the house that we've paid for anyway. It's like it should be our right. And certainly that was the feeling in our community, and I'm sure in other communities as well. So me personally, I don't begrudge the people for paying social rents for 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, and then having the option to buy that house at a reduced rate because it gives them the security and so on. But what Ian was saying earlier about the lack of replacement of those social houses, that's where the problem, I think, comes in for me.
Okay, yeah. First of all, I think we need to have a look at what was happening back then as well. I mean, when we talk about the reason why people buy houses today, and we've touched on this, haven't we? It's the motivation to not be in this lack of security. It's the motivation to have security that leads you to wanting to own your own house. Whether that's an illusion or not, again, that's another discussion, isn't it? But back then, there was no insecurity from the social housing. They had a high amount of social housing, and if you were in social housing, you were secure already. In order to get people to take these large chunks of their money and pretty much gamble it on mortgages, there was a Brexit-style campaign that backed that up at the time, where Thatcher had children turning against the ideals that their parents had put in front of them with the promise of what life would be like if they held that. And let's be honest, a hell of a lot of those families, and the reason why these houses are now owned by private landlords is because then we had a financial crash. And these mortgages hadn't been paid out, and so it was capitalists who swooped in and took all these houses off of the working class people who had exercised their right to buy 5 or 6 years previous.
Right, and I just want to bring you in here. This is what I think. I think, look, it might not have been the best of policies, right? It probably wasn't the best of policies. Certainly not the replacing of the housing stock that we lost.
It had to be replaced.
But yeah, it had to be, and it should have been, and it never was. So that was probably the. But I've got no issues with the government giving, market value of the house to working class people. If anything, it was one of the first times that working class people actually got something that looked like a handout that they probably didn't expect, and it was almost like a lottery win for them. They've all of a sudden overnight they've accumulated £50,000 in equity value in the house that they're living in.
Yeah, I'll disagree with Alex slightly on this point.
Please do.
I think in theory, right to buy is fine, which I know is probably like a big oof to someone on the left to say that, but I think if that money was directly going to building another house, it makes sense to.
If it's freeing up the capital,
yes.
and what we're talking about there is almost a rolling stock, aren't we?
Exactly, because you sort of the house gets to a certain age, it probably is better.
So where did the money go? No,
the,
as in,
to
that's
the
a
financial
good question,
sector.
because the money must have gone
Yeah.
somewhere. So that these working class people have said, you own 50% equity, buy out the other 50%. So you've got a house that's worth, I don't know, £120,000 in the current market. They've taken a mortgage of £60,000 because they've accumulated 50% of the equity by renting it for 8 years or whatever. That £60,000 gone to the local council or the local government or whatever. And then where? And then it should have been, like you say, recycled into.
Reinvested, yeah, and I think if it's reinvested for something that is sustainable for an aging population, it probably isn't a bad model to go to.
Does anybody know where that money went? Alex, you're listening. If you do know where that money went, do shout. Alex says, and the big thing, Section 21 stops renters from standing up for themselves, because if they try and enforce any of the rights that they do have or complain about poor conditions and hazards, then they are evicted with Section 21's no reason given. The People Tenants Union has faced a lot of cases like this. That's why we need solidarity. Nothing but solidarity from us guys here in the studio. I'm sure a lot of people listening as well. Alex, Sadiqa goes on to say, lack of housing isn't the case. There's sufficient housing. People who need social housing should be entitled to it. Land use should be a cap. So there should be some kind of cap in. Okay, so that's interesting. We're going to talk about a cap in terms of, if you were to have landlords, how many houses could they have? You might say that's 0, or you might say that's 5, whatever. But we're going to go to a break now. We're going to be back in about 4 minutes. That first half has flown by. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back very soon, guys.
You're listening to Salam Radio, and it's now time for Isha Azan. This Azan is sponsored by Park Foods. Come and see the difference.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم بك نحيا وبك نموت وإليك المصير رضينا بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا.
If you want to learn about Islam and Muslims, stay tuned.
Assalamu alaikum, and we're back on Why Politics Matters here on Assalam Radio 106.2 FM. Thank you so much for joining us again for the second half of the show. The first half, we just rattled through very few items, but there's so many points of discussion, and it's one of these topics that I think everybody's got to say in, because literally everybody accesses housing. It's something that everybody can relate to, everybody can understand. I just want to move on a little bit, and we've talked about right to buy and whether or not that was a good thing or a bad thing. I just want to mention Adam Watford also commented on the Facebook saying right to buy wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but the replacement of the housing stock was. I want to talk about reasons why people become landlords. So the question I asked was, is being a landlord unethical? And we got yeses and nos and so on, but yeah, I mean, what? In a nutshell, can you just give me a straight answer? What do you think? Is being a landlord unethical?
I'm not going to give you a straight answer here, because I feel like we're going to lose half the audience if I do. Because, I think,
say it like you see it, like genuinely. I mean, I think. I mean, the one thing I did want to point out is let's not get angry at each other. We're all, either a few checks away from being working class, literally on the street, and I'm literally one generation away from being an immigrant. So it's not like the people that are listening to this show, they're either working class, or they're working class with an additional property, and that's only just coming to their family. It's not something.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I want to, before I answer that, separate the landlords out a bit, because
let's do that.
Let's leave to one side the big landlords that are living off 10, 15, 20 properties. Let's talk about, because normally when we say is it unethical to be a landlord, we're really talking about someone that we know that's managed to remortgage or been left some money and brought one, maybe two extra properties.
Right, okay.
I'd maybe bring it further and say that actually we're not talking even about individuals, we're talking about landlords as a class.
Yeah.
And as their role, and do they need to exist, and is their existence moral or ethical?
Yeah, and like I say, I mean, I'm sure you can guess what my answer is going to be to this, but I think we should just
shock me.
Yeah, I think it's completely unethical. But I think to get there, we have to unpick a little bit why people are becoming landlords, and try and have a bit of sympathy with the financial position of why someone would do it, and then debunk them. Basically, is
okay. So let's do that. I like that approach,
Yeah.
and I think our listeners will really appreciate that as well. Alex, I want to bring you in. A very good friend of ours, Lisa Forbes, commented, and she didn't even answer the question as to whether or not being a landlord is ethical or unethical. Sure. She went straight to pensions.
Yeah,
and that's brilliant, because that's, I would say, certainly for the previous generation of immigrants, they had no trust or faith in financial institutions, health service, police, education, anything. They were here, they didn't have that security, and they thought the only way I'm going to look after myself in retirement is if I have a rental property. And that's because they had a complete lack of security in pension. So what are your thoughts on that class of landlord?
well, I was just going to say, you've brought it back to that point again, and it's all about the security, isn't it? And of course, people are, because pensions are so low, because they have a lack of ability to invest in other ways or seek security through other measures, that they are turning to this. And that doesn't mean they're going to be ruthless because they've become a landlord, or inhumane. Landlords can come in all different flavours.
Sure.
That's not me suggesting we should necessarily eat them right here and now. But what do they offer society? Now, normally wealth is created through labour, producing a product, or taking a product and adding some value to it. Landlords don't add any value whatsoever. They might say that they are facilitating the access to the product. Well, no, the product's already there. Yeah. In fact, what they're doing is installing another step in society that doesn't have to be there and fabricates the market.
And I think that's probably the most common argument you hear back from landlords is, well, if I weren't here providing this houses, there'd be even more homeless people. And I say to them every time, you didn't build the house.
No.
You have not built this house. All you have done is had the capital to be able to purchase the house and hoard that from somebody else.
So let's bring it back to what Imtiaz's question was, and combine it with what do landlords produce and what do they add through their existence.
Go for it.
And what they do is they actually create the situation that Lisa is asking her question around. It creates a situation where people are looking to turn to predatory operations to grab some security because it's all that's left.
Okay, wait.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to call
Was
you
it the
on
word
that.
predatory?
Yeah, a little bit. Do you
Yeah,
mind?
sure, absolutely.
Okay,
I
wait.
don't mind
Listen. Okay,
whatsoever.
no. Okay, so look at me.
Yeah.
First generation immigrant.
Yeah.
English is my second language.
Sure.
I'm not familiar with financial markets. I'm not familiar with savings and investments. I've been abused and exploited in the workplace my entire life because English wasn't my first language. I didn't get a pension. Nobody signed me up to a pension. Nobody told me about my options. And I've accumulated enough wealth to be able to own a property.
Okay.
And I buy that property outright and I rent it because I want security when I'm old.
Sure. So, but it's to create a profit and to extract money through seeking rent.
Right.
Yeah?
Okay.
Now, let me just
Go
put
on,
you
no,
on
no.
one thing, though,
Yeah,
if I may.
as long as you let me finish too.
No, absolutely, I will. But I'm going to be analogous here, and I wonder, would you be questioning me if I said ticket scalpers are morally wrong and the practice of what they do is unethical?
Completely, I would. But
what you think?
but-
You'd agree with me? Or
No,
you'd
no, no.
be
I'd agree
questioning-
with you that they are not operating.
What is the difference between what a ticket scalper does and what a landlord does?
Yeah. So my point is this.
There
Ian,
is no
I'll bring
difference.
I'll bring you in as
Okay.
well. But no, my
And
point
we
is
wouldn't be having this conversation if it was ticket scalpers. Everybody, even you landlords out there listening to this show, I'm sure all of you would have some foul words to say against ticket scalpers when
finish.
you're trying to get a ticket
Let me
to
finish.
your Real Madrid or your AC Milan games.
Okay, let me finish. So you've got people who've been exploited in the workplace.
Yeah.
And they've been subject to rent themselves. That's the only asset they understand. Yeah. They can have a tangible pot of money that they can put into a house, and they understand that when they buy the house, they have an asset that's relatively safe and it accumulates an income for them. So for them, having no trust in the pensions, having no faith in or nothing to rely on from their jobs, when they get to 60, 65, 70, thinking I've got 10, 15 years where I'm going to be potentially living in poverty, or I can accumulate enough wealth to buy a house. So what I'm saying is, whether you want to see it as ethical or unethical, what I'm saying is I can understand that.
Yeah.
And in the current climate, yes. Which is why we have to have these conversations.
Yeah,
and
and
what do you
educate
think?
I
people.
want to come in there because
Go on.
that's where wanted to start from. I understand from a financial point of view why people are doing this.
Right.
But you've got to look on the flip side of that. And
Doesn't make it right, does it?
no, and what I was going to say was, who is paying for their retirement? It's somebody else within the community.
Somebody else is paying for their retirement.
But not only someone else, someone that's undoubtedly less fortunate than they are because they haven't been able to accumulate the capital to buy it in the first place.
Less privileged?
Less privileged, however we want to say it. I'm trying to take the heat out of it a little bit, but
oh, we love it heated.
the fact of it is someone in a worse position that you are in that is now not only topping up your income every month,
Sure.
but is also paying an asset for your retirement, paying a house for you to have. And so whatever gymnastics mentally these landlords try to do, and I've heard all of the arguments.
Of course you have, yeah.
I've heard all of the arguments of why
That's why you're on
I'm
the
a
show.
good landlord. Do you know? Because this is the thing. And even the fact that they call themselves good landlords, I think there's something inherent within them that they know that it's a bad practice.
let me just-
But whatever way you look at it, you are exploiting someone for something that is, well, we've already agreed, is a basic human right. You're exploiting someone in a worse position than you
Who needs what you've got to survive?
that needs what you've got to survive.
Yeah. So there was a comedy sketch from Chris Rock, big fan of Chris Rock, and he said, what is it with all these dads? They're like, I'm a good dad, I ain't been to jail. He goes, you're not supposed to go to jail. What do you mean you've been a good dad? So
As
it's
if
like,
that's the benchmark.
exactly,
Yeah.
that's a benchmark. So good landlords, provide standard accommodation, above standard accommodation.
Below
just
market
supposed
rate.
to-
This is-
below market rate,
But
right.
there's another argument that you've actually touched on here, and that is, of course, Of course, these people are seeking this security because the pensions are rubbish. Yeah, they know that stuff isn't going to be great for them
Yes.
later on in their life.
Yeah.
Okay, because so what they're actually recognising here is it is a problem with society that needs fixing. However, instead of trying to fix it and instead of free their brothers from the plantation, they're joining the plantation owners.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me outline this scenario then. An elderly gentleman wants an income in retirement, but doesn't want to extract the from the less fortunate. Therefore, chooses to sell the house that he doesn't need to live in, and ends up with, I don't know, £100,000 in cash. Right. Buys an annuity. What does that do? That benefits an insurance company. The house is sold to a landlord who's ultimately going to do the same thing.
Yeah, and this is why we need to start putting in deeds and wills that the houses can't be sold to.
Love it. All right. Absolutely
have
love
to
it.
be sold.
Let's
for,
go on to policy. Before we do, I'm really grateful for all the interaction, guys, and I'm going to read some of these comments out. Linda Watson says, in the 80s, that was the only way we could afford to buy our first house in Alton. It was sold to a housing association. We always feel bad about buying our council house. We don't feel bad, Linda.
It's not your fault.
It's not your fault at all. Yeah, exactly.
We're going to use that money to buy more.
Exactly. Yeah.
What they were saying
We
they
bought it
would.
for 21,000, which seems crazy now. Even then, mortgage payments were cheaper than council rents. Sadiqa says, as I said, I want to read this. Second generation immigrant. I was always brought up with earnings and saving money because we had massive lack of opportunity. Being a person of colour also contributes to lack of opportunity. Identity, being a woman, which also adds to that. So someone who's saved their money should be allowed to provide a service to someone, i.e. rental, and also build for the future. I don't think you got nods all the way up to when you said being able to provide a service to somebody. Kirsty Knight says, buying a house is getting harder for the younger generation. I'm finding it more and more common now where parents are buying houses and renting it to their children. Alex says, I think the issue is that although we can sympathise with trying to attain that financial and physical security, we can't get away from the fact that it's at the expense of someone else, which is your point, Alex. I think, yeah, Alex and Alex agree. Surprise, surprise. Shazem Ali says, I wouldn't say less privilege. What privilege have those coming from other countries and building a housing portfolio with having English as a second language?
I will
answer that one,
sure,
please.
Yeah, no, I will
Capital.
do. Privilege isn't about what you have. It's about the barriers you don't have to meet that other people do meet on a daily basis. So in this instance, there is a privilege, and that privilege is economic privilege. You can have economic privilege and come from any part of the world, speak any language, and meet other barriers that people from the native country do not meet. However, having an economic privilege means that you are being able to cross over barriers which people of that native tongue are unable to because of their lack of economic privilege, and entering the housing market and exploiting people for rent seeking is one of them, I'm
No,
afraid.
I think you've missed his point. I do want you to answer it though. He's saying there's no economic privilege either because you come from a state of nothing. So you've basically you work hard and you save,
Right.
and then you accumulate an asset.
But then you have. Sorry, I'm
No,
going to
go
jump
on.
in
Yeah,
there.
go for it,
But
yeah.
at this point, you have that privilege because you have the asset, and you are renting it to someone that is now not going to be able to afford an asset because they're paying for yours. So you don't buy the house outright 9 times out of 10. The landlords, they have buy to let mortgages.
Yeah.
So they just get enough capital to put a deposit down on a house.
Yeah.
And that's the privilege just there, because
And
anyone that's got
look,
30 grand sitting
look,
around ain't going to be on the private rented market. They're going to put it towards a house.
It's not like people want to rent.
No,
all I'm saying is I'm hearing Shazad's coming from a place where he's saying you've come with nothing. English is your second language. You've worked. It's like one of those. You've worked hard. You've made something yourself. Why are you pulling me down? So I get that. What he's saying is, what's to stop other people from doing the same thing? But you're saying the system is exploitative. So if other people do it as well, it just makes it more exploitative.
I don't want to pull him down. I just don't want him to pull other people in society down. Do you
Right.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's
And you have to realise that the nature of landlording, of owning excess. I mean, let me put it a different way. What is the purpose of houses? Why were they
To
invented?
home people.
To home people, okay. And why do we need to home people? What happens when we don't?
Well, they're out on the street, isn't it? It's
So
going
they
to be
become
like,
ill. They're
going to die.
They die, yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they die, right? So we created this invention to house people, yeah, not to put people in and extract from their labour, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back to ticket scalping. It's the same thing. The only difference is, right, the musicians create the show, the sound producers, the music engineers put it all together, yeah? You can go and buy a ticket. We can all go and buy a ticket. A ticket scalper can go and buy a ticket. Landlording is the exact same.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're increasing the value on something, and actually, altogether as a class, what you're doing is making society a lot worse, because you're fabricating the housing market, you're raising the costs of housing, you're raising the cost of rental, and you're leaving people with even less. Now, since 2008, wages have only gone up by 6%. Rental prices, the cost of rent has gone up by 27% in that same period. Year on year, landlords are taking more and more money from workers, which means there's more and more money in the landlord class and less in those in the rental class.
Do you know those YouTube videos that show you like top goal scorer by year, and it just goes up and the bar charts go up?
Yeah.
There was a similar one for rent increases versus wage increases, and wage increase just stays flat relative to rent, and rent just goes all the way up there, and it's literally what you're saying. So people were paying something like 30% of their disposable income in rent, and now it's like 50% of their disposable income. So the growth is massive, and all that means is they can consume less. They've got less disposable income after paying rent,
and pass some of the excess costs from inflation onto their renters.
Yeah. I'm going to just reference, I'm really, really sorry. I can't remember who said this. Somebody said this on my post, and I absolutely love this. And this was in reference to somebody was comparing it to owning companies and profiting off dividends. And I said that's not quite the same thing, because housing's not a choice, whereas consuming a McDonald's is a choice. That's probably the small. But somebody said entrepreneurship is creating opportunity for yourself and others. Landlords is removing the opportunity from others. Who said that? Can you remember who said that?
I'm not sure, but it's spot on. It's an unproductive. You know, if you go out and start a business, you're probably going to end up employing people. You're going to create products for society. You know, even to the...
So you create wealth in the community that you're operating in.
Exactly. So even in the sort of capitalist system we have, you are putting into the economy.
Yes.
Whereas if you're a landlord, you're just a barrier. You're a barrier
extracting.
to... You know, we talk about GDP in the country and all the rest of it. It's because so many people are making their money through passive income.
So in the housing story, it is the developers, it is the builders who create.
Yeah.
It is the landlords who extract.
Yeah. Okay, so
yeah,
we were going to go on to policy.
Yeah,
now, I love that. I love this, and you know what I also love? I love that the comments have gone a bit quieter, because we've had this conversation, and I think people have listened, and it's difficult to argue against what you're saying about ticket scalpers, and it's difficult to argue about what you're saying about
I'd love to
landlords
hear an
removing...
argument that actually made me sit back and think, actually, no, you've got something, I'm in the wrong here, and please don't think that I'm just being hard-nosed about this and I won't take it on. But
look, I said this as well in my post. I said, look, this is not about right and wrong. This is not about I know better than you. Nobody's telling anybody
it's
off.
about what is ethically correct and right.
Yeah, let's have an open discussion about this. And we've got Faisal from saying maybe we should have ethical landlords to saying we should ban buy-to-let mortgages. So we're doing something right. Yeah, we're moving him.
And that's what conversation's about, isn't it?
Yeah. Ian, policy. What can we do? What can we do?
Right.
How can we start changing the model?
Okay, so I think from a personal point of view, I'll say we need to radically rethink how we organise just society if we're really going to fix this. But we could make it a lot better, a lot better with some simple things.
Go on.
First and foremost, I'd say scrapping Section 21. That would just put so much power back towards tenants to actually be able to complain about the mould on their walls, or to be able to dispute a rent increase, and bring back proper long-term tenancy agreements, not 12 months, 2 years, 2 months, 6 months, or, bring this back to, so the norm is 5 to 10 years tenancy agreements.
Okay.
Reintroducing rent controls.
Let's take these one at a time. I know we haven't got long, but removing Section 21s. Alex, your thoughts on that? This is just removing the right of the landlord to evict their tenant for no fault. That's the key thing. No fault. Yeah.
Well, Ian beautifully wrapped it up with the other issue, didn't he, about complaining? And I think, if I'm right, Ian, what you're pertaining to here is the act of what is actually very common practice in Peterborough as well, as I'm sure you boys at Peterborough Tenants Union have come across, is retaliatory evictions, where a tenant will complain about something which does need fixing, which is ill to their health or should be brought up to standards such as mould. But because they've rules it's a lot cheaper and a lot easier for them to just get rid of that tenant than it is to fix the problem.
Just their selective licensing.
Yeah.
That's a scheme that's been
It
run.
is. But sorry, if I might just
Go on.
one other thing,
No,
'cause
go
I'm
on.
sure that you'll probably notice, have we seen many issues with mould in the Peterborough area?
Yeah. Let me get my
Oh, we're not going to go down this road.
Well,
There's,
what
do you think is at
plenty.
hand,
There's
Ian,
plenty
maybe?
of
2,244 people in Peterborough, households in Peterborough, living in unsanitary or overcrowded properties.
Right now, today.
Right now. Well, that was according to 2001 to 2022 local authority housing return, so it's probably worse by now.
And you mentioned overcrowding. I mean, do we have a shortage of housing in Peterborough? Is there a lack of empty houses?
At the last count, 1,400 empty properties sit in Peterborough.
1,400.
1,419 in Peterborough.
So-
And I'll just, while we're on that, there's 5,824 households on the housing waiting list.
So there's certainly an argument to be made that even just using the current resources that we have locally, we can start solving some of the problems that these people are facing right now.
Yeah,
you need to have the political will. You need to have a full-on.
you do, but you don't need to build giant housing estates in the next 3 months to fix this problem. You could make it dramatically better
By using what we have
by
now.
using what's there already.
So go on. I mean, I'm on the council. I don't know if you know.
I've heard.
Yeah, a few times. What can I do? What can I do to make it easier for people on the housing register getting a house, given there's so many empty houses?
I think from a council level, it would be trying to take ownership of them houses or use them until they're going to be built and
Bring them back into stock, you mean?
Yeah,
like,
bring them back into stock, basically.
How does a council take over an empty house?
Well, I mean, there's certainly going to be mechanisms for them to do so, because there is mechanisms for grabbing hold of properties that have been lying vacant for X a number of years within certain shires. But I mean, we currently face a social housing emergency, they called it, in the local areas. Listeners might have seen reported in the ET, and I'm just going to very, very quickly question that, because an emergency is something you don't expect to happen. Okay, we've evidenced on this show that not only is this one of governance, but of conservative party making, right back to the days of Thatcher. Those in ruling governance now today locally have all these figures that we're spouting about today.
Sure.
In fact, they'll have been watching them rise, and then 2 days ago they announced they have an emergency. What on earth have they been doing for 14 years, watching this come towards them?
So look, we've got 4 minutes of the show left. We're not going to be talking about what we can do about house prices.
We might need another show on this.
Definitely. We're not going to talk about first-time buyers and what we can do to help them. We're not going to talk about rent controls. We're not going to talk about
I mean, the show
new
is about
builds versus
housing, and
needs.
all we've
I
literally
know.
spoken about is the landlord rental and tenant
No,
dynamic.
but what I will come up to, because I mean, Faisal's just said it as well. He said it's criminal to keep a house empty. You've mentioned it as well about empty houses, the number of empty houses in London. For me, I don't understand the thought process behind owning a property and it's empty. I don't understand it. Like, I can understand owning a property and having tenants in it, because then you get the capital appreciation and you get the rental income, which is equivalent to increase in share prices, and you get a dividend. But why would you keep the property empty? Explain that. Why do people do that?
I don't know.
I would
Probate a lot of
seriously,
time, or invest. I mean, I know when they built the new flats over on Town Bridge, they were being advertised in overseas, Hong Kong, areas like that, as investment properties.
And weren't they actually being snapped up? I believe something like over 70% of all Flat and Keys flats have been bought from overseas investors.
Yeah. So there is, I mean, certainly London, that's a huge problem, is the investment market.
But it actually shows you how these investors see the local area and where we fit into that dynamic, doesn't it? Because obviously we are the renters, these investors are seeking a profit from.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And that's as a result of the social housing emergency. The scarcity is there because of local governance making, of the management of local asset making, and now we have predatory investors from overseas eyeing us up as being a way to increase their profits from them extracting money from our labour locally.
Yeah, bearing in mind, I mean, we've had ups and downs, but GBP is a strong currency relative to some other countries. So it's probably not a bad place to store your money. If you're an investor in Pakistan, say, and the rupee is going crazy right now. If they'd invested in London property's shot through the roof. The pound is a lot stronger versus the rupee. They're getting triple, quadruple the returns. Faisal says, no hassle and no maintenance costs. Overseas buyers store their money. These are the fruits of the free market capitalism. We can definitely agree with that. Come on, Ian.
Can I have just 1 minute just to
course
explain a
you
little
can.
bit
It's all
about Peterborough Tenants Union? Because
Yes.
a lot of the listeners might not have heard of a tenants union before. So what it is, it's similar to your union at work, how they would support you if you had a dispute with your
Sure.
employer. We're a group of renters and supporters that rally together to support each other.
Okay.
So it's all based. We're not a charity. It's a democratic organisation. It's based on solidarity. So
How can renters join?
PeterboroughTenants.org.
PeterboroughTenants.org.
Yeah.
Or just put in Google Peterborough Tenants
Put
Union.
into, or look on any of the social Peterborough Tenants Union. You'll find us one way or another. We've got links to joining.
What if someone's not a member? They're having problems with their landlord. Can they get in touch?
Yeah, you can get in touch, but we do ask people to join because it's one, it gives us a bit more agency to speak on your behalf, and two, it is very much about, we don't want to be a top-down organisation that's handing you out advice. We will help, but the bigger we get, the more people there is going to be to help each other. So it's all about sharing resources, sharing knowledge, and basically sticking together.
Linda says that's disgusting. Should be illegal to sell homes to overseas investors when we've got such a problem. Listen, we've got 13 seconds of the show. Thank you to everyone who's interacted today.
Thank you
it
very
was
much.
always going to be a big show, and I'm so glad that it went the way it did. Ian, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for being
Yeah,
on.
Guys, we
Thanks
will
for
have a
having me.
housing show part 2 soon. Join us then. Bye-bye.
Stay tuned to Salam Radio after this short ad break.
हाँ जी जनाब अज तुसें ने कियां 12 बजे वे